There's the scarlet thread of murder running through the colorless skein of life. And our duty is to unravel it and isolate it and expose every inch of it. This is Carolina Hates. Welcome, dear listener, to the Carolina Hates podcast, brought to you by Bragg Productions. I'm your host, Dan Sellers. The military has quite a substantial footprint in North Carolina, bringing around $70 billion annually into our economy. North Carolina ranks fourth in the nation for active military personnel, making the armed forces our second leading employer. As such, it shouldn't be a surprise that military personnel are occasionally involved in some of North Carolina's most heinous crimes. Captain Marty Thier married his high school sweetheart Michelle as soon as he graduated the Air Force Academy. But they didn't live happily ever after. 9 years had passed and Michelle was bored. She wanted to go places and do things, but Marty only ever wanted to sit at home. Michelle begged him just to take her out for a night on the town every now and then, but even that seemed too much to ask. Michelle tried to occupy herself with her own career. She was a licensed psychologist. They tried marriage counseling, but nothing worked. Michelle wanted more. She created an online dating profile and trolled the web under the alias of Married Brunette. She hooked up with several men online, mostly one-night stands, occasionally taking on multiple partners at a time. But one man became her regular, Army Staff Sergeant John Diamond. The two began a sordid and secret affair which included swingers parties and orgies. She left Marty and Diamond left his wife, and the two moved in together. For a bit. Michelle was no more content with Diamond than she had been before. A few months later, she moved back in with Marty, but still maintained her occasional trysts with Diamond. Just 2 weeks after moving back in with Marty, Michelle flew to the Caribbean for a job interview. Diamond went with her, where she introduced him as her fiancé. While in the islands, the two came up with a plan. When they got back, Michelle went back to Marty and Diamond borrowed a 9mm handgun from a friend. A few days later, Marty and Michelle went to a Christmas party. While there, Michelle called Diamond and set their plan in motion. On the way home, she concocted an excuse to stop by her office. Diamond waited for them inside and shot Marty 5 times, killing him. Diamond was quickly arrested by military police and sentenced to life in Leavenworth Prison. But Michelle was a civilian, so they couldn't arrest her. They worked with local law enforcement to bring charges against Michelle, but she was one step ahead. She had been doing some research on how to ensure she could not be found. She used her computer skills to create multiple fake identity documents. She changed her hairstyle and color, and even underwent plastic surgery. Local authorities were at a loss, so they contacted the U.S. Marshals, who were able to pick her up 6 months later. She's also serving a life sentence. In May of 2020, 8 Fort Bragg paratroopers took it upon themselves to break COVID restrictions and go camping along the Cape Lookout National Seashore. It was Memorial Day weekend, and they felt they had earned the right to blow off a little steam, fishing and drinking with buddies along with pot, LSD, and murder. Only 7 soldiers returned from their trip. In the report they filed on the way back to the base, they claimed that Army Specialist Enrique Roman Martinez had simply wandered off. They had been hit with severe thunderstorms, and they alleged that he must have gotten lost in harsh weather conditions. A week later, his head washed ashore near the place they had camped. His body had never been found. The Army's Criminal Investigations Division thought their story was suspicious, even more so when they learned that a park ranger had stopped by the camp to tell them to move their vehicles. And this was after the night he supposedly went missing, and during the time they claimed to be frantically searching for their friend. Yet none of them reported anything out of the way to the officer. Months passed with no physical, forensic, or testimonial evidence. And after 21 months, the Army finally charged the 7 soldiers, but not with the death of Roman Martinez. They faced drug charges and AWOL charges for violating the approved travel radius during the COVID quarantine. Army Specialist Enrique Roman Martinez had joined the Army at 17 because, according to his sister, quote, all he wanted was to do good in life, end quote. During his 4 years of service, he had earned the Army Good Conduct Award, a National Defense Service Medal, a Global War of Terrorism Service Medal, an Army Ribbon of Service, and the Army Parachutist Badge. The Enrique Roman Martinez Military Cold Case Justice Act of 2022 would create uniform standard for military cold cases and establish procedures should an investigator leave the case. Perhaps the most famous military crime to happen in North Carolina was the MacDonald family in 1970. To this day, it remains one of the most litigated murders in American history. At 3:42 a.m. on the morning of February 17, 1970, Fort Bragg Emergency Dispatch received a hysterical call from Jeffrey MacDonald saying there had been a stabbing. Officers arrived about 10 minutes later to find the back door of the house wide open. They found Jeffrey and his wife Colette in the master bedroom. She had been brutally beaten and stabbed. Both of her forearms were broken, where she tried to defend herself from the blows. She had been stabbed in the chest 21 times with an ice pick and 16 more times with a kitchen knife. Jeffrey MacDonald was wounded but alive. He was found holding his wife in his arms. The word pig had been written on the couple's headboard in Colette's blood. Jeffrey begged the officers to check on his kids. 5-year-old Kimberly MacDonald was found with her skull smashed, and she had been stabbed 8 to 10 times. 2-year-old Kristen had been stabbed 33 times with a knife and 15 times with an ice pick. Jeffrey's wounds were far less traumatic. He had a mild concussion and a number of minor cuts and scratches, none of which ever required stitches. He did have one stab wound that was very clean and precise, which partially collapsed a lung. MacDonald claimed that he had fallen asleep on the couch and was awakened in the middle of the night by his wife's screams. According to MacDonald, he rushed upstairs to find 3 men beating his wife and a long-haired woman egging them on. He claimed she held a lit candle and chanted, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." He said that they turned their attention to him and he fought for his life to fend them off but was knocked unconscious during the struggle. When he came to, he attempted to resuscitate his family and then called 911. Authorities shut down the base and searched every vehicle for anyone matching the description given by MacDonald. The murder weapons were found discarded near the back door of the house: a kitchen knife, an ice pick, and a 31-inch length of lumber. They were all wiped free of prints but were covered in blood. The Army CID quickly began to question and scrutinize MacDonald's statements and found that it didn't match the physical and forensic evidence at the scene. Jeffrey was trained in hand-to-hand combat and had been engaged in a struggle for his life, yet the room showed no evidence of this save one overturned plant. He claimed he had never seen the murder weapons before being attacked with them, yet the piece of wood was found to have come from a renovation of his daughter's bedroom closet. And why leave him alive? He had seen their faces. He posed the biggest threat. The girls had all been killed several times over, but his wounds were mostly superficial. MacDonald was a medic in the Army Green Beret. It was thought that he could have easily cut himself to make it look like he was attacked. The wound to his chest was inconsistent with a common kitchen knife. It was more likely inflicted with a surgical scalpel. Each of the 4 members of the MacDonald family had a different blood type. This is extremely rare, but proved helpful to the investigation in forming their own theories of events. It began with an argument in the master bedroom. Their babysitter told authorities that the couple had been short with each other in the weeks leading up to the murders. Then they suggested it had turned physical when Colette hit Jeffrey with a heavy hairbrush that matched the bruise on his forehead. He retaliated by beating her mercilessly, first with his fist, then with a piece of wood. 5-year-old Kimberly came into the room to see what the commotion was about, and he struck her with the lumber, smashing her skull. Traces of brain matter was found just inside the doorway. Believing his wife was dead, he carried Kimberly back to her room and stabbed her multiple times. He then went to 2-year-old Kristen's room, but his wife had regained consciousness and crawled to Kristen's room. She laid on top of her daughter to try to protect her, but Jeffrey beat his wife some more and tossed her aside. By this time, the little girl was wide awake, confused, and terrified. She put up her hands in defense, but MacDonald stabbed straight through them and into her tiny body. He then carried his wife back to the master bedroom and staged the scene with cues from the Manson family murders, which had happened just 6 months prior to this. He then cut himself, collapsing his lung, and called 911. On May 1st, the Army scheduled an Article 32 hearing against MacDonald. During the hearing, a delivery man came forward and claimed that the blonde woman MacDonald described may be Helena Stokely, a 17-year-old drug addict who often hung out with her boyfriend and his 2 friends. Helena had told the delivery man that she couldn't marry her boyfriend until, quote, "we go out and kill some more people," end quote. She was questioned by the police and admitted to going out for a drive the night with the guys, but said she was too strung out on mescaline to recall what they had actually done. When MacDonald testified at the hearing, his story had changed a little, and he made an effort to explain some of the contradictory details of his first statement. However, this only further muddied the waters of the truth. On October 13, 1970, all charges were dismissed against him due to the lack of evidence. CID investigators turned their sights on Helena, but could never bring a case against her either. MacDonald was honorably discharged shortly after the hearing and immediately went on a media campaign. On the Dick Cavett Show, his story changed once again. He claimed that he had suffered 23 wounds that night, quote, "many of which were potentially fatal," end quote. Colette's parents initially believed MacDonald to be innocent, but time went on and Jeffrey's story kept changing and changing. They became suspicious. Her father, Alfred, had visited MacDonald in the hospital the day after the attack and knew that none of his injuries were anywhere close to being potentially fatal. He spent several hours in MacDonald's house studying the crime scene and the transcripts of the testimony. The Army had closed the investigation on MacDonald, so the only other course of action was a civil trial through the United States Department of Justice. He did this in early 1972, but since MacDonald had been a member of the Army at the time of the alleged crime, the FBI refused the complaint. Meanwhile, MacDonald moved to California to build a prestigious medical career. He worked in the emergency room at St. Mary's Medical Center. He was an instructor at UCLA Medical School. He was the medical director of the Long Beach Grand Prix. He presented lectures on the recognition and treatment of child abuse. He helped found the National Cardiopulmonary Resuscitation Training Program. But Colette's father never gave up. For the next 2 years, he would attempt to get the Justice Department to accept his motion against MacDonald. Finally, in April 1974, he convinced them to convene a grand jury to determine if there was enough evidence to indict. The grand jury heard testimony for 9 months before formally indicting MacDonald on 3 counts of murder. His lawyers filed a motion for dismissal based on double jeopardy, but since the original 1970 proceeding was an Article 32 hearing, double jeopardy didn't apply. However, the appellate court dismissed the indictment based on a defendant's right to a speedy trial. The case found its way to the United States Supreme Court, who reinstated the indictment in 1978. After yet another round of appeals and motions, Jeffrey MacDonald finally stood trial for murder on July 16, 1979 in Raleigh. Shortly after 4 p.m. on August 29th, MacDonald was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder in the death of his wife and 2 counts of second-degree murder in the deaths of his children. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. He would only serve 6 months before another appeals court overturned his conviction and set him free. Back and forth it would go like this, and it seems that there's hardly been a day since 1979 where there wasn't some kind of appeal or appeal of an appeal being heard by the North Carolina courts. In 1981, the appeal that set him free was overturned, and he returned to jail. There were further trials and hearings in 85, 86, 91, 92, 97, 2012, 14, 18, and 2021. At the age of 80 years old, Jeffrey MacDonald remains in prison. For now. To learn more about these stories, check out nypost.com, army.mil, armytimes.com, onlyinyourstate.com, fayobserver.com, and military.com. This episode was researched and written by Jeffrey Cochran and was produced and hosted by me, Dan Sellers. You can find everything about our production company, Wreak Havoc Productions, at our website, wreakhavocproductions.com. You can find the Carolina Heinous podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Please take a second and leave the show a review and share it with a friend. This podcast is also brought to you by Carolina Heinous, Inc., a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting folklore storytelling throughout the Carolinas. You can help us on our mission by joining our team on Patreon. With monthly contributions of $5, $10, or $25, you can receive perks such as the Carolina Heinous Map of Monsters and Legends, behind-the-scenes video series, and monthly mini episodes that are exclusive for members. Just visit patreon.com/Carolina Heinous to learn more. You can find everything about us, including the Carolina Heinous book, our next Legends and Lore historical marker, and upcoming tour dates on our website, carolinaheinous.com. I'm now proud to say that you can get your very own Carolina Heinous apparel from our good friends at Crap-O-Rama. Just visit their website at crap-o-rama.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, simply at Carolina Heinous. And of course, you can reach us directly at carolinaheinous@gmail.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. Tune in then to hear more about those things that go bump in the night.